I never thought 3 words could change everything. But when Margaret looked at me under that flickering porch light, her voice barely a whisper, and asked me to hold her just once, I realized some repairs go deeper than broken fixtures. Some things that need fixing can't be found in any toolbox. It was a Thursday. The kind that starts with lukewarm instant coffee and ends with sawdust in your hair. I'd been crawling through Mrs. Patterson's attic since 7 a.m., placing old electrical wiring that probably dated back to when Nixon was in office. The smell of mothballs and decades-old insulation clung to my work shirt like a badge of honor. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never asked for. My name's Charlie Brennan. 36 years old, unmarried by choice, or so I kept telling myself, and the guy people call when their lights stop working and their hope starts dimming. I've been fixing things since I was 12, when my dad handed me a screwdriver and said, "Son, everything breaks eventually." The question is whether you're the type who learns to fix it, or the type who throws it away. I chose fixing. Always have. The call came through around 3:30, just as I was packing up my van outside the Patterson place. Unknown number, local area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. Thursdays were supposed to be my easy days, the buffer between the chaos of midweek emergencies and the weekend honeydew lists that kept my business afloat. Brennan Electric, I answered, wedging the phone between my shoulder and ear while I sorted through a tangle of wire nuts. "Hi, is this Charlie?" The voice was soft but steady, with the kind of warmth that made you picture someone who smiled easily. "I got your number from Denise Morrison," she said. "You fixed her kitchen light last month." Denise. Right, sweet lady, lived alone with 3 cats named after British prime ministers, made killer oatmeal cookies, and always paid in cash. That's me. What can I do for you? My porch light's been acting up, flickering on and off. Sometimes it won't turn on at all. I know it's probably something simple, but... She paused, and in that silence I heard something familiar. The hesitation of someone who'd learned not to ask for help too often. "I was hoping you could take a look. Today, if possible." I glanced at my watch. 3 I could squeeze in one more job before calling it a day. "Sure, what's your address?" 1247 Maple Grove Lane. It's the blue house with the white trim. I'm Margaret, by the way. Margaret Chen. Margaret. The name suited the voice somehow. Classic, unpretentious. I scribbled the address on the back of a receipt from the hardware store. "I can be there in about 20 minutes. That work for you?" "Perfect. Thank you so much, Charlie. Really." There was genuine relief in her voice, the kind that suggested this wasn't just about a malfunctioning light fixture. But then again, it rarely was. In my line of work, I'd learned that when people called about broken things, they were usually talking about more than just the obvious problem. The drive to Maple Grove Lane took me through the older part of town, where the houses had character instead of square footage, and the trees were old enough to remember when this was all farmland. I liked this neighborhood. The homes here had stories, layers of life built up over decades like rings in a tree trunk. 1247 is exactly as advertised. A modest blue colonial with crisp white trim and a front porch that looked like it had hosted countless summer evenings and morning coffee conversations. The garden was well maintained, but not obsessive. Someone who cared about beauty, but didn't let perfection become the enemy of living. I pulled into the driveway behind a silver Honda Civic that had seen better years, but was clearly well loved. A rainbow-colored wind chime hung from the porch overhang, moving lazily in the late afternoon breeze. The porch light fixture itself was simple brass. It's probably original to the house. Mounted beside a front door painted the color of sage. As I gathered my tools from the van, I noticed the light flicker once, as if announcing my arrival. Sometimes, electrical problems had a sense of timing that bordered on the theatrical. I was halfway up the front walk when the door opened. Margaret stepped out, and for a moment I forgot why I was there. She was maybe 5'6", with shoulder length. Dark hair streaked with silver that caught the sunlight like threads of tinsel. She wore jeans that actually fit properly, and a soft green sweater that brought out her eyes. But it was her smile that stopped me, genuine, and slightly tentative, like someone who'd forgotten how nice it felt to have visitors. "Charlie?" "Margaret, thank you for coming so quickly." Her handshake was firm, no nonsense. I liked that. Too many people these days shook hands like they were afraid of commitment. "No problem." "Let's take a look at this troublemaker," I said, nodding toward the flickering fixture. "It's been driving me crazy for weeks. My friend Denise said you're some kind of electrical wizard." "More like an electrical mechanic with delusions of grandeur," I replied, setting down my toolbox. "But I've been known to sweet-talk a stubborn fixture into cooperation." Margaret laughed a real laugh, not the polite chuckle most customers gave my weak attempts at humor. It was the kind of laugh that made you want to be funnier, just to hear it again. "Well, if sweet-talking doesn't work, I've got coffee inside. Fair warning, though, it's probably stronger than whatever you're used to." "I'll keep that in mind," I said, pulling out my voltage tester. "Mind if I ask how long you've lived here?" 8 years next month. Bought it right after my divorce." She said it matter-of-factly, without the bitterness that usually accompanied that particular revelation. Best decision I ever made, even if I can't fix a damn thing myself. As I started unscrewing the fixture's mounting plate, I found myself wondering about Margaret Chen's story. 8 years was a long time to live alone in a house this size. Long enough to make it truly yours, but maybe long enough to feel the emptiness too. The wiring was older than I'd expected, but not dangerous. Just loose connections that had worked themselves free over time. A 15-minute fix, tops. But something told me this was going to be more than a 15-minute. The problem with the fixture was simple enough. Corroded connections and a loose ground wire that had been slowly working itself free for months. As I worked, Margaret hovered nearby, not in an anxious way, but like someone who genuinely wanted to understand what was happening. "So it wasn't anything I did wrong?" she asked, watching me clean the connections with a wire brush. "Not unless you've been sneaking out here at night to sabotage your own electrical system," I said. "This is just what happens when copper meets. Whether over time, basic entropy." "Entropy," she repeated thoughtfully. "The universe's tendency toward disorder." I looked down at her, surprised. Most people glazed over when I started talking about electrical theory. Physics. "School chemistry teacher? Well, was retired 3 years ago." She shrugged. 32 years of trying to convince teenagers that the periodic table was actually fascinating. Did it work? About half the time. The other half just wanted to know if we were going to blow anything up. As I worked, she told me about her teaching career, how she'd loved the challenge of making complex concepts accessible, the satisfaction of seeing understanding dawn in a student's eyes. There was something wistful in her voice when she talked about it, like she missed having a purpose beyond maintaining an empty house. "You miss it," I observed, threading the ground wire back into place. "More than I expected to, my friends all. Said I'd love retirement, sleeping in, no lesson plans, freedom to travel." She laughed, but it was different from before. Smaller. Turns out freedom can be another word for loneliness when you don't have anyone to share it with. There it was, the thing I'd sensed in her voice on the phone, the hesitation when she'd asked me to come today. Not just about the light at all. What about your friends? The ones who said you'd love retirement. Margaret was quiet for a moment, absently deadheading. "Some flowers in a nearby planter. They're all married, have been for decades. When we get together, it's always couples dinners or double dates where I'm the odd one out. They mean well, but—" She trailed off, then looked up at me with a self-deprecating smile. "Listen to me, dumping my life story on the poor electrician. Sorry, I don't get much adult conversation these days. Don't apologize. Besides, I charge extra for therapy sessions," I said, testing the connection. The comment earned me another genuine laugh. "How much extra? Because I might need the bulk rate." I was tightening the final screw when my phone buzzed. Text message from my business partner, Kurt. "Emergency at the Morrison place. Water heater flooded basement. Need you ASAP." Showed Margaret the message. "I'm sorry I have to run. Emergency call. But your light should be good as new now, of course." "Thank you so much for squeezing me in." She reached for her purse. "What do I owe you?" $45 for the service call. As she counted out the bills, I found myself hesitating by my toolbox. There was something about Margaret, the way she'd opened up. genuine loneliness behind her careful composure that made it hard to just leave. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Margaret, I said, this might be forward, but if you ever need anything else fixed, or even if you just want someone to check the house over, give me a call. Sometimes it helps to have a professional eye on things. Her smile was soft, grateful. That's very kind of you, Charlie. I might take you up on that. As I drove away, heading toward what would turn out to be a 3-hour battle with a catastrophically failed water heater, I kept thinking about the loneliness in Margaret's voice. 32 years of teaching, 3 years of retirement, 8 years in that house since her divorce, as a moth painted a picture of someone who'd built a life around service and connection, only to find herself suddenly without either. I thought about my own life too, the comfortable routine of work and solitude, the way I'd convinced myself that independence was the same thing as contentment. At 36, I had a successful business, a paid-off house, and the freedom to do whatever I wanted. So why did Margaret's quiet admission about loneliness hit so close to home? The Morrison emergency kept me busy until after 8, by which time I was too tired to cook and too wired to sleep. I ended up at Mel's Diner. It's the kind of place that served breakfast all day and didn't judge you for eating dinner alone at the counter. Rough day? Asked Donna, the waitress who'd been serving coffee and wisdom at Mel's for longer than I'd been alive. Just long. Had this job today? ... I started, then caught myself. What was I going to say? That a porch light repair had somehow gotten under my skin, and I couldn't stop thinking about a woman I'd known for all of 45 minutes? Job that got complicated? Donna prompted, refilling my coffee without being asked. Something like that? She studied me with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every variety of human trouble pass through her section. Charlie, honey, you've been fixing things for people for years. But when's the last time you let someone fix something for you? It was a good question, one I didn't have a good answer for. That night, lying in bed and listening to the familiar sounds of my old house, settling, I found myself wondering about Margaret. Was she having trouble sleeping too? Was her house too quiet, too empty? Did she ever stand on that porch and wonder what it would be like to have someone to share the evening breeze with? I told myself I was being ridiculous. We'd had one conversation. One brief connection over a simple electrical repair. People shared their stories with service workers all the time. It didn't mean anything. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the image of Margaret standing on her porch, framed by the light I'd fixed, looking like someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to not be alone. 3 days passed before I found an excuse to drive down Maple Grove Lane again. I told myself I was just checking on a job, good customer service, making sure the repair held up. But the truth was simpler and more complicated. I couldn't stop thinking about Margaret Chen. The porch light was working perfectly when I pulled up Tuesday afternoon. Steady, warm light that made the blue house look welcoming in the fading daylight. I sat in my van for a moment, debating whether to knock. What was I going to say? Hi, just wanted to make sure your light bulb was still screwed in properly. I was about to drive away when the front door opened. Margaret stepped out with a watering can, heading for the flower boxes. She was wearing faded jeans and a yellow cardigan that made her look like spring personified. When she spotted my van, her face lit up with genuine surprise. Charlie, is everything okay? Did I forget to pay you? I climbed out of the van, feeling foolish. What? No, nothing like that. What? I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd check on the fixture. Sometimes old connections can work loose again. It was a weak excuse, and we both knew it. But Margaret's smile suggested she didn't mind. Well, as you can see, it's working beautifully. Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot, and I've been experimenting with my grandmother's lemon cake recipe. Fair warning, the last batch was either brilliant or catastrophic, depending on your tolerance for adventure. 20 minutes later, I was sitting at Margaret's kitchen table with a slice of what turned out to be genuinely excellent lemon cake and coffee that could wake the dead. The kitchen was painted a warm cream color, with copper pots hanging from hooks and herbs growing in small pots. On the windowsill, it felt lived in and loved, but also somehow too quiet for one person. This is incredible, I said, taking another bite of cake. What made you think it was catastrophic? I may have accidentally used salt instead of sugar in the frosting on the first batch. She laughed, settling across from me with her own coffee. I was distracted, reading while I baked. Bad habit. What were you reading? She hesitated, then got up and retrieved a thick paperback from the counter. Don't laugh, it's a romance novel. I know it's silly at my age, but sometimes you need to believe that people still find each other, you know? I looked at the cover, a couple embracing on a beach at sunset, all flowing hair and impossible ABS. Nothing silly about hope, I said, and meant it. Margaret studied me for a moment, as if reassessing something. You're different from what? I expected when I called for an electrician. Different how? Kinder? More? ... present. Most service people are polite, but distant, you know? Professional, but not really there. You actually listen. I wasn't sure how to respond to that. In my experience, people usually wanted their problems fixed quickly and quietly, with minimal personal interaction. But Margaret seemed to genuinely want connection, conversation. Maybe I just haven't had anything interesting to listen to in a while, I said. Oh, please. I'm a retired chemistry teacher who spends her days reading romance novels and talking to her plants. I'm about as interesting as watching paint dry. You're wrong about that. The words came out more seriously than I'd intended. Margaret looked up from her coffee, something shifting in her expression. Charlie, can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Are you married? Involved with anyone? The directness of the question caught me off guard. No, I'm not. Why? She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup like it held answers. 2 questions she wasn't sure she should ask. My friend Linda, she's one of the married ones I mentioned. She came by yesterday after her book club. She spent 20 minutes telling me about their weekend getaway with their husbands. How romantic it was. How I should try online dating again. Again? I tried it for about 6 months after my divorce. Disasters, mostly. Men my age either want a nurse or a purse, and the younger ones. ... double quotes, she shrugged. Well, let's just say the age gap usually showed up pretty quickly. Found myself leaning forward slightly. What do you mean? Different life stages, different interests. I'd want to talk about books or current events. They'd want to talk about clubs and Instagram and whether I'd ever tried. Well, things I hadn't tried. She blushed slightly. Linda thinks I'm too picky. Says I need to lower my standards if I want companionship. It's terrible advice, is it? Because some days I think she might be right. Some days I think maybe companionship matters more than compatibility. Maybe being alone is worse than settling. Sadness in her voice hit me square in the chest. I set down my coffee cup and looked at her directly. Margaret, you don't strike me as someone who settles for anything less than what she deserves. And what do you think I deserve? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with more weight than either of us had intended. I could feel something. Shifting, some invisible line being approached, if not crossed. I think you deserve someone who thinks you're fascinating exactly as you are. Someone who wants to hear about your chemistry students and your grandmother's recipes in whatever book you're reading. Someone who doesn't see your age as a limitation or your intelligence as intimidating. Margaret's eyes were bright, and I realized with a start that she was on the verge of tears. That's a beautiful thought, she said quietly. But those someones don't seem to exist in the real world. At least not for women like me. Women like you, 50 years old, divorced, set in my ways, too smart for my own good, according to my ex-husband. I wanted to argue with every item on that list, to tell her that any man who thought she was too smart was probably too stupid to deserve her. But before I could figure out how to say that without overstepping every boundary we hadn't quite established, my phone rang. Curt again. Another emergency. Sorry, I said, checking the message. I have to go. Electrical fire at a restaurant downtown. Of course, thank you for stopping by and for the cake consultation. As I gathered my jacket, Margaret walked me to the door. The porch light cast a warm glow over both of us, and for a moment we just stood there, not quite ready to say goodbye. Well, Charlie, she said finally, would it be weird if I called you sometime? Not for electrical work, just to talk. My heart did something complicated in my chest. It wouldn't be weird at all. Good. Because sometimes it gets very quiet here. And today was the first time in months that quiet felt like peace instead of emptiness. As I drove toward downtown and whatever electrical crisis was waiting for me, I realized that something fundamental had shifted between Margaret and me. We weren't just customer and service provider anymore. We were two people who had somehow found each other in the middle of our respective loneliness, and neither of us seemed quite sure what to do about it. But for the first time in years, I was looking forward to finding out. Margaret called me on Friday night. I was sitting on my couch, eating takeout Chinese food and watching a baseball game I wasn't really following when my phone rang. Her name on the caller ID made me sit up straighter. "Hi, Charlie. Is this a bad time?" "Not at all. How are you?" "Restless," she said with a laugh that sounded a little forced. "I've reorganized my spice cabinet twice today and alphabetized my books. I think I'm officially losing my mind." "What's going on?" There was a pause. The sound of something being set down. A mug, maybe, or a glass. "Do you ever feel like you're disappearing? Like you're becoming invisible and nobody notices?" The question caught me off guard with its raw honesty. "What happened, Margaret?" "I went to dinner tonight. Linda and her husband, Janet and her new boyfriend, Sarah and Mark, 3 couples and me." Her voice was quiet, thoughtful. "I've been to 100 dinners like this over the years, but tonight was different. They weren't just including me out of pity anymore. They'd actually forgotten I was there." I muted the television. "What do you mean?" "They were talking about a couple's retreat they're planning for next month. Discussing logistics, sharing rooms, who's driving with whom. For 20 minutes, they planned this entire weekend right in front of me. And not once did anyone acknowledge that I couldn't be part of it. Not once did anyone say, 'Oh, Margaret, maybe we should plan something you could join too.'" I could hear the hurt in her voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. Finally, Linda noticed I'd gotten quiet and asked if I was okay. When I said, "I felt a little left out," you know what she said? "Oh, honey, you wouldn't want to go anyway. It's all couples activities." Margaret's laugh was bitter. As if my singleness was a choice I was making to be difficult. "That's awful, Margaret. I'm sorry." The worst part is she's probably right. I wouldn't have enjoyed it. It's watching 3 happy couples be happy together while I pretend I'm fine being alone. It would have been torture. She paused. But being invited would have been nice. Being considered would have been nice. I found myself getting angry on her behalf, imagining her sitting at that dinner table, slowly realizing she was invisible. 2 people who claimed to care about her. Your friends sound like they need a reality check. They're not bad people, Charlie. They've been coupled up for so long, they've forgotten what it's like to be alone. To them, my situation is temporary, something that will fix itself if I just try harder or lower my standards or put myself out there more. But you don't see it as temporary. Another pause. Longer this time. I used to. Right after my divorce. I thought this was just a phase. I'd heal, I'd date, I'd find someone new. But it's been 8 years, Charlie. 8 years of awkward coffee dates and men who wanted me to be someone I'm not. 8 years of being the extra wheel, the placeholder, the woman who gets invited to things out of obligation. She was crying now. I could hear it in her voice, though. She was trying to hide it. I'm 50 years old, and I'm starting to think this is just how it's going to be. That I'm going to spend the rest of my life watching other people live the life I wanted. Margaret, no, it's okay. It's okay. It's tied. I just needed to say it out loud to someone who wouldn't immediately try to fix it or tell me to sign up for another dating app. She took a shaky breath. "Thank you for listening. Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "What did your marriage look like before the divorce?" She was quiet for so long I thought the call might have dropped. "Then it was comfortable, safe. David was a good man, but we were more like roommates toward the end. We shared a life, but we didn't really share ourselves, if that makes sense." It does. When he asked for the divorce, he said, I deserved someone who was passionate about me, not just fond of me. At the time, I thought he was being cruel. Now I think maybe he was being kind. Do you miss him? I miss the companionship, the daily check-ins, having someone to share small things with. I miss feeling like I mattered to someone's day. She paused. Do you know what I did yesterday? I spent 10 minutes telling the grocery store clerk about my garden because I realized it had been 3 days since I'd had a real conversation with another human being. My chest tightened. I knew that feeling, the desperate need for connection that made you overshare with strangers. The way loneliness could make you pathetically grateful for even superficial interaction. Margaret, can I tell you something? Of course. Been thinking about you all week, not just as a customer or a friend, but ... more than that. It scares the hell out of me because I don't know what to do with those feelings. The silence stretched between us, loaded with possibility and danger. Charlie, she said finally, her voice very soft. How old are you, 36? I'm 14 years older than you, I know. People would talk, let them, your friends, your family. Don't have much of either to worry about. Another pause. Is crazy, she whispered. Maybe, but crazy doesn't always mean wrong. I could hear her breathing, could almost feel her thinking through the implications. The complications, the 100 reasons why whatever was happening between us was a bad idea. Charlie, what if I told you that right now I just want someone to hold me? Not for sex, not for romance, just ... To hold me and make me feel less alone in the world? My heart stopped. There it was, the vulnerability she'd been building toward, the thing she really needed but was afraid to ask for. Then I'd ask if you wanted me to come over. I do, she said immediately, then caught herself. God, that sounds desperate. Sounds honest? It's late. You probably have work tomorrow.
Margaret.
Do you want me to come over or not? Yes, she whispered. I really do. Then I'll be there in 15 minutes. After I hung up, I sat in my truck for a moment before starting the engine, understanding that whatever happened next would change everything between us. We were about to cross a line we couldn't uncross. Enter territory neither of us had mapped, but Margaret was sitting alone in her house, feeling invisible and forgotten, and I had the chance to remind her that she mattered. That seemed more important than any complications that might follow. The porch light was on when I pulled into her driveway, warm and steady, like a beacon guiding me home. Margaret opened the door before I even knocked. She'd changed into soft gray sweatpants and an oversized sweater that made her look younger, more vulnerable. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry now, and she managed a small smile when she saw me. Hi, she said quietly. Hi, yourself. We stood there. For a moment, both of us suddenly uncertain, now that I was actually here. The phone conversation had felt safe, distant. This was immediate and real and terrifying. Come in, she said finally, stepping aside. I made tea. Chamomile, I thought. I don't know what I thought. The living room was softly lit by table lamps, cozy in a way that made you want to sink into the furniture and stay forever. Margaret had classical music playing low in the background, something gentle and melancholy that matched the mood perfectly. We sat on opposite ends of her couch, a careful distance between us, both holding steaming mugs we didn't really want. I feel like I should explain, Margaret began, then stopped. Actually, no. I don't want to explain. I just want to not think for a while. Then don't think. She looked at me then. Really looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. Came, you asked? Most people would have made excuses, found reasons why it wasn't appropriate or convenient or smart. I'm not most people. Something shifted in her expression. Without saying anything, she set down her mug and moved closer to me on the couch. Not touching, but close enough that I could smell her shampoo, see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Charlie, she said softly, I'm 50. Would you hold? Me. Just once. There it was. The question from the title, the moment everything had been building toward. Her voice was barely above a whisper, vulnerable and brave and heartbreaking all at once. I didn't answer with words. I just opened my arms, and she came into them like she belonged there. She was warm and solid against my chest, her head tucked under my chin, and for a long time we just sat like that, breathing together in the lamplight. Thank you, she whispered against my shirt. For what? For making me feel like I exist. I tightened my arms around her, understanding in that moment that this wasn't about romance or attraction, though both were certainly there. This was about human connection, about the basic need to be held and comforted and reminded that you matter to someone. We stayed like that for maybe an hour, talking quietly about everything and nothing. She told me about her students, the ones she missed most, the satisfaction of watching, understanding dawn in young faces. I told her about starting my business, about the pride of building something with my own hands. At some point, Margaret fell asleep against my shoulder. I should have woken her, should have gone home to my own bed and my own life. Instead, I stayed perfectly still, watching her face in the soft light, memorizing the curve of her cheek. The way her breathing had finally evened out into something peaceful. I must have dozed off too, because the next thing I knew, sunlight was streaming through the windows and Margaret was gently shaking my shoulder. "Charlie, hey, wake up." I opened my eyes to find her smiling down at me, hair mussed from sleep, looking more beautiful than anyone had a right to look at 7 in the morning. "Oh God," I said, sitting up quickly. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize. I slept better last night than I have in months." She was already moving toward the kitchen. "Coffee. I'm making breakfast. It's the least I can do." Over scrambled eggs and toast, we carefully avoided talking about what had happened, what it meant, where we went from here. Instead, we discussed the weather, my work schedule, her plans for the garden. Normal things, safe things. But when I was getting ready to leave, Margaret caught my hand at the door. "Charlie, about last night, ... We don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." "I do want to, just don't know what to say, except that it meant something to me, more than I expected." "To me too." She squeezed my hand. "What happens now?" Before I could answer, a car pulled into the driveway behind my truck. A white sedan with a woman behind the wheel who was staring at us through the windshield with undisguised curiosity. "No," Margaret muttered. "That's Linda." Linda turned out to be a perfectly coiffed woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a sharper smile. She climbed out of her car with the determined stride of someone on a mission. "Margaret, I was just stopping by to check on you after last night. You seemed—" Her gaze flicked between us, taking in my rumpled clothes, Margaret's obvious discomfort. "Upset. Fine, Linda. Really. Charlie was just helping me with some electrical issues." The lie came easily, but Linda's expression suggested she wasn't buying it. At 7 in the morning, how dedicated. Linda's smile turned predatory. "Don't believe we've met. I'm Linda Davidson, Margaret's oldest friend, Charlie Brennan," I said, offering my hand. Her handshake was brief and cold. "Well, I should let you get back to your ... electrical work." She turned to Margaret. "Call me later. I want to hear all about these mysterious power outages." After Linda drove away, Margaret leaned against her doorframe and sighed. "She's going to tell everyone, isn't she?" "Probably. Are you okay with that?" I considered the question seriously. Was I okay with being the subject of small-town gossip? With people speculating about my relationship with a woman 14 years older than me? "Are you?" I asked instead. Margaret's smile was rueful, but determined. "You know what? I think I might be." As I drove home, I realized that whatever was happening between Margaret and me had just become public knowledge, whether we were ready for it or not. The question now wasn't whether people would talk, it was whether we cared enough about each other too, whether whatever came next. And for the first time in years, I found myself hoping the answer was yes. The gossip started faster than I expected. By Monday afternoon, my business partner Kurt was giving me knowing looks over his coffee cup at our usual lunch spot. "So," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee with exaggerated casualness, "heard you've been doing some after-hours electrical work? Where'd you hear that?" "My wife plays tennis with Linda Davidson. Apparently you were spotted leaving a certain chemistry teacher's house at 7 a.m. Saturday morning." Kurt grinned.
"Out looking,"
and I quote, "thoroughly rumpled." I nearly choked. "On my sandwich? Jesus, Kurt. Hey, I'm not judging. Just curious. Margaret Chen, right? She's attractive. A little old for you, maybe, but she's not too old for anything," I said. More sharply than I intended, Kurt raised his eyebrows. Okay. Touchy subject. So it's serious then? I didn't know how to answer that. Was it serious? We'd shared? One night of innocent intimacy and a morning of careful conversation? But the way I'd been thinking about her constantly for 3 days suggested it might be more serious than I was ready to admit. It's complicated, I said finally. The best things usually are. That evening, Margaret called again. This time, I was ready for it, had been hoping for it all day. Hi, Charlie. I hope I'm not bothering you. Never. How are you holding up? Well, I've had 3 concerned phone calls, to surprise visits, and one friend who actually asked me if I was having a midlife crisis. She laughed, but it sounded tired. How about you? Kurt thinks I'm either very lucky or very stupid. Do you think you are? Jury's still out? She was quiet for a moment. Charlie, would you like to come over for dinner tomorrow? Nothing fancy, just I'd like to cook for someone again. It's been a while. I'd love that. Tuesday evening found me standing on Margaret's porch again, this time carrying a bottle of wine and wearing my best shirt. She answered the door in a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, and for a moment I forgot how to speak. Hi, she said, smiling at my obvious confusion. You look beautiful. She blushed, actually blushed like a teenager. Thank you. Come in. Dinner's almost ready. The house smelled incredible garlic and herbs and something that made my mouth water. She'd set the dining room table with real dishes and cloth napkins, candles flickering in the center. It felt formal and intimate at the same time. This is amazing, I said, looking around. You didn't have to go to all this trouble. I wanted to. It's been so long since I had a reason to use the good china. She took the wine from me, her fingers brushing mine. Besides, I wanted to thank you. Properly. For the other night, over dinner, chicken piccata that tasted like something from a fancy restaurant, we talked about everything and nothing. She told me about her garden, how she'd started it after the divorce as a way to feel productive. I told her about my dad, how he'd taught me to work with my hands, to find satisfaction in fixing broken things. He sounds like he was a good man, Margaret said, refilling our wine glasses. He died of a heart attack when I was 25. Never got to. See me start the business. He'd be proud of you. I hope so. I paused, swirling my wine. What about your parents? Gone now. Both of them. Mom passed 5 years ago. Dad the year before that. Oh. They never understood the divorce. Thought I should have worked harder to save my marriage. She made air quotes around the words. We're from a different generation where women stayed no matter what. What was the final straw? With your ex-husband, I mean. Margaret was quiet for a long time, considering her answer. He told me I was becoming boring. That retirement had made me old before my time, that I'd lost my spark. She looked up at me. The irony is, I think I had lost it. I just didn't know how to get it back. And now, my smile was soft, genuine. Now I'm starting to remember what it feels like to be interesting to someone. After dinner, we moved to the living room with the rest of the wine. Margaret sat on the couch, her legs tucked under her, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. Charlie, can I ask you something personal? Shoot. Why aren't you married? You're 36, successful, kind. What's wrong with you? Teasing, but there was genuine curiosity behind the question. Nothing's wrong with me. I just haven't found the right person. Or I hesitated. Or I haven't been brave enough to go after what I really want. And what do you really want? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with possibility. I set down my wine glass and looked at her directly. Right now. Want to kiss you? Margaret's breath caught. Charlie, ... I know all the reasons why it's complicated. It's the age difference, the gossip, the fact that we barely know each other. But I can't stop thinking about you, Margaret. I can't stop wanting to be around you. She set down her own glass, her hands trembling slightly. I want that too. More than I should. Then why do you look scared? Because I am scared. It's been 8 years since anyone made me feel this way. And you're so young, so full of possibilities. What if you wake up one day and realize you've wasted your time on a 50-year-old woman who's seen her best days? I moved closer to her on the couch, close enough to take her hands in mine. "Margaret, look at me." She did, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You are not a waste of anyone's time. You are not past your best days. You are beautiful and intelligent and fascinating, and any man would be lucky to be with you. Even a man 14 years younger, especially a man 14 years younger." She laughed through her tears. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying." And then I kissed her. Soft and tentative at first, then deeper when she kissed me back. She tasted like wine and possibility, and when we finally broke apart, both of us were breathing hard. "Wow," she whispered. "Yeah, wow." We sat there for a moment, foreheads touching, both of us trying to process what had just happened. "So what now?" Margaret asked. "Now we see where this goes, one day at a time." She smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, it reached all the way to her eyes. "I'd like that." As I drove home that night, I realized that despite all the complications ahead, the gossip, the judgment, the uncertainty, I had never felt more sure of anything in my life. Margaret Chen had become important to me in a way I couldn't fully explain, and whatever challenges came next, I was ready to face them. The reckoning came 3 days later in the form of an unexpected visit from my sister Rachel. I was working under the hood of my truck in the driveway when her silver SUV pulled up, and I knew immediately that this wasn't a social call. Rachel lived 2 hours away and never dropped by unannounced. "Hey, stranger," she said, climbing out with the kind of forced casualness that meant trouble. "Got a minute? Always got time for my favorite sister. I'm your only sister, Charlie. And we need to talk." Rachel was 5 years older than me, married to a successful accountant, mother of 2 teenagers who called me Uncle Charlie, and thought I was slightly exotic because I worked with my hands instead of spreadsheets. It appointed herself my unofficial life advisor after Dad died, a role I both appreciated and occasionally resented. "Let me guess," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "Linda Davidson plays tennis with Kurt's wife, who mentioned my love life to someone who knows someone." "Who called you?" Actually, it was more direct than that. "Linda called Mom's old friend Patricia, who called me because she was concerned about Charlie making poor decisions." Rachel leaned against my truck, arms crossed. "Want to tell me what's going on?" Could have lied, could have downplayed the whole thing. Instead, I found myself telling Rachel everything about the porch light repair. Margaret's loneliness, the night I held her while she slept, the dinner that ended with our first kiss. Rachel listened without interrupting, her expression cycling through surprise, concern, and something that might have been understanding. "So you're dating a 50-year-old woman," she said when I finished. "We're seeing where things go. Charlie, you know I love you, and I want you to be happy. But have you really thought this through?" "What's to think through?" "The practicalities. She's 14 years older than you. She's probably thinking about retirement communities while you're thinking about starting a family. She's lived a whole life already while you're still figuring yours out." The words stung because they echoed my own doubts, the fears I'd been trying to suppress. "It's not about age, Rachel. It's about connection. Connection is important, but so is compatibility. What happens in 10 years when she's 60 and you're 46? What happens when her health starts declining and you're still in your prime? Have you talked about children? Children? Do you want them? Because at 50, that ship has probably sailed for her. Are you okay with that?" I hadn't thought about children. In all my scenarios about Margaret and me, kids had never featured. The realization hit me harder than I expected. "You don't know? Do you?" Rachel's voice was gentler now. "Charlie, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to protect you." And her honestly. "If you haven't thought about these things, then maybe you're not as serious about this as you think." That evening, Margaret and I had plans to see a movie. But sitting in my truck outside her house, Rachel's words echoing in my head, I couldn't bring myself to go to the door. Instead, I called her. "Hi," she answered, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "Are you here?" I was just grabbing my jacket. "Margaret, can we talk instead? Maybe go for a drive." Something in my tone must have warned her. Course is everything. "Okay, I don't know." 20 minutes later, we were parked by the lake on the edge of town. the setting sun painting the water gold. Margaret sat quietly in the passenger seat, waiting for me to find the words. "My sister came to see me today," I said finally. "She's concerned about us, about the age difference." "Among other things?" Margaret nodded slowly. "What did she say?" I told her about the conversation, watching her face grow more guarded with each concern Rachel had raised. When I finished, she was staring out at the water, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "She's not wrong," Margaret said quietly. "I've thought about all those things too. Late at night when I can't sleep, I lie there and wonder what I'm doing. What we're doing. And what conclusion do you come to? That maybe I'm being selfish? That maybe I should let you find someone your own age. Someone who can give you a future instead of just a present." The pain in her voice was almost unbearable. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away gently. ... "Charlie, I care about you. More than I expected to. More than I expected to. More than is probably wise. We haven't talked about the hard questions. We've been living in this bubble where age doesn't matter and the future doesn't exist. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. It is if one of us gets hurt." We sat in silence for a while, watching the sun disappear behind the tree line. Finally, Margaret spoke again. "Can I ask you something honestly? I need you to really think about your answer, okay? Do you want children someday?" The question hung between us like a loaded gun. I thought about Rachel's kids, about the way they called me Uncle Charlie and climbed all over me at family gatherings. I thought about the vague future I'd always imagined for myself, a wife, kids, maybe a dog, a normal life. "I always thought I did," I said carefully. "And now I don't know. I know I want you." Margaret smiled sadly. "That's not an answer, Charlie. That's an avoidance." She was right, and we both knew it. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we weren't saying, all the questions we weren't ready to answer. "Maybe we should take some time," Margaret said finally. "Think about what we really want, what we're really ready for. Is that what you want?" "No, but it might be what we need." As I drove her home, both of us quiet and lost in our own thoughts, I realized that the easy part was over. We'd found each other, discovered this unexpected connection, allowed ourselves to believe that love might be enough. But now the real world was intruding, demanding answers we didn't have, forcing us to confront futures that might not include each other. When I walked her to her door, regret turned to me under the porch light I'd fixed what felt like a lifetime ago. "Charlie, whatever happens, I want you to know that these past few weeks have been some of the happiest I've had in years. You made me feel alive again. That's not nothing." It's not nothing," I agreed. "It's everything." She kissed me then, soft and lingering, tasting like goodbye. As I drove home, I wondered if we'd just talked ourselves out of the best thing that had ever happened to either of us. All in the name of being practical. Sometimes I thought being practical was just another word for being afraid. 2 weeks passed without contact. 2 weeks of me driving the long way to work to avoid Maple Grove Lane, of checking my phone obsessively for messages that never came, of lying awake at night replaying every conversation we'd had. I threw myself into work, taking on extra jobs, staying busy enough that I couldn't think about Margaret's sad smile or the way she'd pulled away from my touch. Kurt noticed. "Of course." "You look like hell," he said one afternoon as we finished rewiring a restaurant kitchen. "When's the last time you slept?" "I sleep. I mean actual sleep, not whatever restless tossing you've been doing." He packed up his tools methodically. "You know, there's this crazy concept called calling people when you miss them. It's complicated. Everything's complicated until you decide it isn't." That night, I found myself parked outside Margaret's house again. The porch light was on, steady and warm, just like I'd left it. I could see her moving around inside, a shadow passing by the living room window. I must have sat there for 20 minutes, my hand hovering over my phone, before I finally worked up the courage to call. "Charlie?" She answered on the first ring, and I could hear the surprise in her voice. "Hi. I'm outside. Can we talk?" A pause. Then, "I'll put on some coffee." When she met me at the door wearing jeans and an old sweater that made her look younger, softer, Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and I could see she'd been crying recently. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. "You look terrible," she said, which made me laugh despite everything. "Thanks, you too." We sat in her kitchen, nursing. Coffee neither of us wanted, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. "I've been thinking," I said finally. "So have I, about what your sister said, about the future, about children, about all the practical reasons why this won't work." Margaret nodded, her hands wrapped around her mug like it was an anchor. "I realized something," I continued. "I've spent my whole life being practical, safe, making sensible decisions, avoiding risks, choosing the path that made sense on paper. And where has it gotten me? 36 years old, alone, successful, but not happy. Going through the motions of a life instead of actually living one." "Charlie, let me finish. You asked me if I wanted children, and I panicked because I didn't know how to answer. But I've been thinking about it, really thinking, and the truth is I don't know what I want from the future. I just know what I want right now, today, in this moment." I reached across the table and took her hands in mine. This time, she didn't pull away. "I want you, Margaret. Not the theoretical you who fits neatly into some predetermined life plan, but the real you. The woman who reads romance novels and makes incredible lemon cake and talks to her plants. A woman who taught chemistry for 32 years and still gets excited when she explains how electricity works. The woman who was brave enough to ask a stranger to hold her when she needed comfort. Tears were running down her cheeks now, but she was listening. Maybe we won't work out. Maybe the age difference will matter in ways we can't predict. Maybe I will want children someday and regret this choice. But maybe we'll figure it out together. Maybe love will be enough, or at least worth the risk. What if it isn't?" she whispered. "Then at least we'll know we tried. At least we'll have had this. Whatever this is." Margaret was quiet. For a long time, studying our joined hands. When she looked up, her eyes were bright but determined. "I love you," she said simply. I tried not to, but I do. And it terrifies me because I'm 50 years old and I should know better than to fall for someone who could break my heart. I love you too. Do you? Really? Or do you? Love the idea of me, the novelty, the rebellion against expectations. I stood up, pulling her with me, and cupped her face in my hands. "I love that you use big words casually and assume I'll understand them. I love that you deadhead flowers. While you think that you make sounds of appreciation when you eat something delicious. I love that you're smarter than me and don't make me feel stupid about it. I love that you see the best in people even when they disappoint you." I kissed her then, deeply, desperately, trying to pour all my certainty into that connection. "Love that you asked me to hold you," I whispered against her lips. "And I love that I was brave enough to say yes." Margaret pulled back to look at me, her hands fisted in my shirt. "What happens now? Now we stop overthinking and start living. We take it one day at a time and see what happens. The gossip will get worse. Let it. Your sister will think you've lost your mind. Maybe I have. Maybe that's exactly what I needed." She laughed, the sound watery but genuine. "You're going to break my heart, aren't you? Not if I can help." Promise? I promise to try not to. I promise to be honest about what I'm feeling. I promise not to run away when things get complicated. What if I'm the one who runs? Then I'll chase you." We spent the rest of the night talking. Really? Talking about everything we'd been avoiding. The practical concerns, the fears, the hopes we were afraid to voice. We didn't solve anything, didn't magically make the complications disappear. But we faced them together, and somehow that made all the difference. When I left the next morning, the sun was coming up, and Margaret was standing on her porch in my shirt, waving goodbye. The porch light was still on. It's unnecessary now in the daylight, but somehow perfect anyway, as I drove home. I realized that we'd crossed another line, not just into love, but into commitment, not the kind that came with rings and ceremonies, but the kind that came with choosing each other despite the obstacles, the kind that said we were willing to fight for this, whatever this became, for the first time in 2 weeks. I felt like I could breathe again. The breakthrough came a month later, in the most unexpected way. I was at Margaret's house fixing a temperamental ceiling fan in her bedroom, and she got a phone call that changed everything. "Hello," she answered, balancing the phone between her shoulder and ear while holding the fan steady for me. "Oh." "Hi, Susan. Yes, I remember you from the Teachers Association." I could hear the excitement in the caller's voice even from up on the ladder. "A what? Here in town?" Margaret's tone shifted from polite interest to genuine surprise. When I finished tightening the fan mount and climbed down, curious about what had captured her attention so completely. "A community education center," Margaret said after hanging up, her eyes bright with something I hadn't seen before. "The old Hartwell building downtown, you know, the one that's been empty for 2 years. A developer wants to turn it into a space for adult learning programs. Art classes, cooking workshops, book clubs, lecture series. They're looking for people with teaching experience to help design the curriculum." That sounds amazing. Doesn't it? She was pacing now, the way she did when her mind was racing. "Susan said they specifically want retired teachers, people who understand how adults learn differently than children. They want classes that bring the community together, not just educate." "Are you thinking about applying?" Margaret stopped pacing and looked at me. "I'm thinking about more than applying. I'm thinking about proposing something crazy. I'm listening. What if? What if I pitched a whole series around practical life skills, not just cooking or basic home repair, but real stuff people need to know? Financial planning, basic car maintenance, understanding your electrical system." She gestured toward the ceiling fan. "Things that make people feel more confident, more self-sufficient." "That's a brilliant idea. You think so?" "'Cause I was thinking. Would you maybe want to co-teach some of the practical stuff with me? The electrical work, basic plumbing, that sort of thing?" The suggestion caught me completely off guard. "You want me to teach?" "You explain things beautifully, Charlie. You made me understand electrical theory in 10 minutes better than I learned it in 4 years of college physics. And you're patient, encouraging. You'd be a natural." I'd never thought of myself as a teacher, but the idea was surprisingly appealing. "What would we call it?" "I don't know yet. Life skills for real people. Practical independence?" She grinned. "The Margaret and Charlie show?" I liked the first one better. We spent the next 2 hours planning. Margaret's enthusiasm infectious. She pulled out a notebook and started sketching ideas, a series of workshops that would run over 6 weeks, covering everything from changing a tire to understanding credit scores to basic home maintenance. By the time we were done, we had outlined a comprehensive program that could genuinely help people feel more capable in their daily lives. "This could really work," Margaret said, looking at our notes. "We could make a difference." She looked up at me, suddenly vulnerable. "If you want to. I know it's presumptuous to assume." "Margaret, I'd love to do this with you. The application process took 3 weeks." Margaret threw herself into it with the passion of someone who'd found her purpose again. She researched adult learning theory, contacted former colleagues for references, and wrote a proposal that was part curriculum. "I don't know yet. Life skills for real people. Practical independence?" She grinned. "The Margaret and Charlie show?" I liked the first one better. We spent the next 2 hours planning. Margaret's enthusiasm infectious. She pulled out a notebook and started sketching ideas, a series of workshops that would run over 6 weeks, covering everything from changing a tire to understanding credit scores to basic home maintenance. By the time we were done, we had outlined a comprehensive program that could genuinely help people feel more capable in their daily lives. "This could really work," Margaret said, looking at our notes. "We could make a difference." She looked up at me, suddenly vulnerable. "If you want to. I know it's presumptuous to assume." "Margaret, I'd love to do this with you. The application process took 3 weeks." Margaret threw herself into it with the passion of someone who'd found her purpose again. She researched adult learning theory, contacted former colleagues for references, and wrote a proposal that was part curriculum guide, part community manifesto. I helped where I could, offering input on the technical aspects and learning more about Margaret's teaching philosophy than I'd ever known existed. The night before our presentation to the selection committee, Margaret was a bundle of nerves. If they think it's too ambitious? She worried, pacing around her living room. What if they don't think you're qualified? What if they think the whole thing is silly? Then they're idiots, I said, pulling her down onto the couch beside me. And we'll find another way to do this. You really think it's good? I think it's exactly what this community needs. And I think you're exactly the person to make it happen. But presentation went better than either of us had dared hope. The selection committee, a mix of city council members, and community leaders asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely excited about our vision. When we demonstrated how to safely wire a basic switch while Margaret explained the science behind electrical current, I could see several committee members taking notes. This is exactly the kind of innovative programming we were hoping for, said Dr. Patricia Williams, the committee chair. Practical, accessible, and genuinely useful. When can you start? We got the call 3 days later. Not only had our proposal been accepted, but they were offering us a prime time slot Saturday mornings for 6 weeks, starting in 2 months. They were also providing a modest stipend and all the materials we'd need. Margaret cried when she hung up the phone. Happy tears, the kind that come when something you wanted but didn't dare hope for suddenly becomes real. We did it, she whispered. We actually did it. You did it? This was your vision, your passion, our vision, she corrected. I never would have had the courage to propose this without you. You made me remember that I have something valuable to offer. The news spread quickly through town. Linda Davison called within hours, her tone suggesting she couldn't decide whether to be impressed or skeptical. Gert clapped me on the back and said he was proud of me for finally doing something with all that explaining you're always doing. Even Rachel called, sounding surprised but pleased. I have to admit, she said, when you told me about this teaching thing, I thought you'd lost your mind. But it actually sounds pretty great. And if Margaret's as smart as you say she is, maybe she's good for you after all. The weeks leading up to our first class were a whirlwind of preparation. We met almost daily, planning lessons, gathering supplies, practicing our presentation. Working together like this, the first class was a huge success. 18 people showed up, far more than we'd expected, ranging from college students to retirees. Margaret was in her element, moving seamlessly between explaining the theory behind compound interest and demonstrating how to check tire pressure. I found myself actually enjoying the teaching, especially when I saw the light of understanding in someone's eyes as they successfully wired their first outlet. But success, as we learned, made us a bigger target. The complaint came 3 days later, delivered by Harold Pemberton, the president of the Homeowners Association for Margaret's neighborhood. He knocked on her door Tuesday evening, armed with a clipboard and the kind of self-important expression that meant trouble. Margaret, he said, barely acknowledging my presence as I answered the door. We need to discuss your recent ... activities. What activities, Harold? The teaching program? The publicity? The increased traffic in the neighborhood? He consulted, his clipboard like it contained sacred text. Mrs. Davidson has filed a formal complaint about the number of people coming and going from your house during the planning phase. Apparently there were cars parked on the street, noise violations, commercial activity in a residential zone. I felt my jaw clench. Commercial activity? We were planning a community service program. Harold's smile was thin and cold. Nevertheless, the Homeowners Association has rules about conducting business from residential properties, and there are concerns about your arrangement affecting property values. What arrangement? Margaret asked, though we all knew exactly what he meant. A single woman of a certain age cohabitating with a significantly younger man? It creates questions about the stability of the neighborhood demographic. The words hung in the air like a slap. I stepped forward, but Margaret caught my arm. Harold, she said quietly, are you actually standing on my porch telling me that my relationship is somehow a threat to property values? I'm simply conveying the concerns of your neighbors. Which neighbors specifically? Harold's confidence wavered slightly. Well, Mrs. Davidson has been quite vocal, and the Jeffersons mentioned ... The Jeffersons have been trying to buy this house for 2 years so they can tear it down and build a bigger one, Margaret interrupted. And Linda Davidson hasn't spoken to me civilly since she found out about Charlie. So let's be honest about what this really is. This is about maintaining community standards. This is about a bunch of people who can't mind their own business, I said, unable to stay quiet any longer. Margaret pays her dues, maintains her property, and contributes more to this community than most people half her age. But you're going to hassle her because she fell in love with someone you think is inappropriate? Harold's face reddened. Mr. Brennan, this doesn't concern you. It absolutely concerns me. I love this woman, and I'm not going anywhere. We'll see about that. Harold turned back to Margaret. You have 2 weeks to respond to the formal complaint. The association will be reviewing your status as a homeowner in good standing. After he left, Margaret sank onto her couch, looking suddenly exhausted. Can they actually do anything? I asked. I don't know. The homeowners association has some power, but I own this house outright. They can make my life difficult, though. Fines harassment, making it hard to sell if I ever wanted to. You're not thinking of selling, no. But she looked around. Her living room, at the home she'd built over 8 years. Maybe they're right, Charlie. Maybe I am affecting property values. Maybe having a 50-year-old woman dating a 36-year-old man really does make people uncomfortable. So what? When did other people's comfort become your responsibility? When? I decided to live in a community with rules and expectations. I sat down beside her, taking her hands. Margaret, we can't let them win. We can't let small-minded people dictate how we live our lives. But what if it affects the teaching program? What if the community center decides we're too controversial? Was a valid fear. The program had been such a source of joy for both of us, and the thought of losing it because of neighborhood politics was infuriating. Then we'll find another way, another venue, another format. We'll make it work. Margaret leaned against me, and I could feel the tension in her shoulders. I'm tired of fighting, Charlie. I'm 50 years old, and I just want to live quietly. And be happy? Is that too much to ask? No, I said, tightening my arms around her. But sometimes you have to fight for the right to live quietly and be happy. That night, I called Kurt. Then I called the community center. Then I spent 2 hours researching homeowners association regulations and property law. If Harold Pemberton and his cronies wanted a fight, they were going to get one. But they'd picked the wrong couple to mess with. The counterattack began at 7 a.m. the next morning. When Kurt showed up at Margaret's door with coffee and a grin that meant trouble for someone, so he said, settling into her kitchen like he owned the place, I hear some jackass is trying to mess with my business partner's girlfriend. Kurt, you don't have to, Margaret started. Actually, I do. See, Charlie's been doing electrical work in this neighborhood for 3 years. Half these people have my business cards stuck to their fridges. And I happen to know that Harold Pemberton's been running an unlicensed property management business out of his garage for 6 months. I looked up from my coffee. What? Renting storage space? Doing small repairs for cash? Advertising on Facebook? Marketplace. None of it reported to the HOA as commercial activity. None of it properly licensed with the city. Kurt's smile turned predatory. Funny how people who live in glass houses love throwing stones. By noon, we had a plan. While Kurt handled the Harold Pemberton situation, I reached out to our students from the first class. Margaret contacted Dr. Williams from the community center. Within hours, we had something Harold hadn't counted on. People who were willing to speak up for us. The HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. Margaret spent the week oscillating between confidence and panic. But I could see the teacher in her emerging, the woman who'd faced down skeptical teenagers for 32 years wasn't going to be intimidated by a neighborhood committee. Thursday evening, we walked into the community center's meeting room, expecting to face a hostile crowd. Instead, we found it packed with supporters. Our students were there, along with several neighbors we barely knew. Dr. Williams from the Education Committee, and even Donna from Mel's Diner. Harold Pemberton looked decidedly less confident than he had on Margaret's porch. This is highly irregular, he protested, as person after person stood to speak in our defense. Mrs. Chen, no relation to Margaret, was a 70-year-old widow who'd attended our first class. That young man taught my granddaughter how to change a tire, she said firmly. And Margaret helped me understand my Medicare statements. They are doing more for this community than this association has done in years. Tom Rodriguez, a student who'd been struggling with basic car maintenance, talked about how the class had saved him hundreds of dollars in repair costs he couldn't afford. Even Janet Morrison, Denise's neighbor, stood up. I've lived in this neighborhood for 15 years, and I've never seen Margaret do anything but improve property values. Her garden is beautiful, her house is immaculate, and she's kinder to my children than some of their own relatives. The moment that sealed it came when Linda Davidson herself stood up. I need to say something, Linda announced, her voice shaky. The room went dead quiet. I've been friends with Margaret for 20 years, and I've been a jealous, petty woman for the last 6 months. Margaret's eyes widened in shock. The truth is, Linda continued, I've been envious. Envious that Margaret found love again. Envious that she had the courage to pursue something that made her happy, regardless of what people thought. I filed that complaint because I was bitter, not because Margaret did anything wrong. She turned to face Margaret directly. You've been glowing for months, and instead of being happy for you, I tried to tear you down. I'm sorry. And Harold, this whole thing is ridiculous. Margaret Chen is a pillar of this community, and if you can't see that, then you're blind. Vote wasn't even close. Harold's motion was defeated 8-2, with only Harold himself and one other member voting in favor. The HOA formally dropped all complaints against Margaret. And Dr. Williams announced that the community center was so pleased with our program that they wanted to offer us a permanent monthly slot. Afterward, as we walked to the parking lot, Margaret was quiet. Finally, she stopped under a streetlight and looked at me. I can't believe Linda stood up for me. I can. People know who you are, Margaret. Real people, decent people. They see what you contribute. And what about you? Are you okay with being the younger boyfriend who caused a neighborhood scandal? I pulled her close, not caring who might see. I'm okay with being the guy who gets to go home with the smartest, bravest, most amazing woman in town. Dorda, she laughed, the sound carrying across the parking lot. You know what the best part is? What? Harold Pemberton is going to have to watch us be happy together every single day for the rest of his miserable life. Oh, that's my girl, I said, and kissed her. Under the streetlight, while our supporters cheered from their cars, we'd won more than just a fight with the homeowners association. We'd proven to ourselves and everyone else that love doesn't follow other people's timelines or expectations. Sometimes it shows up in the form of a broken porch light and a woman, brave enough to ask for what she needs. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it stays. 1 year later, I found myself back where it all started, standing on Margaret's porch, working on that same light fixture. Not because it was broken this time, but because we were installing a new smart system that would let her control it from inside the house. You know, Margaret said, watching me work from her spot on the porch swing, I used to think that light was cursed. It flickered for months before I finally called you. What do you think now? I think it was waiting for the right person. To fix it, I climbed down from the ladder and tested the new system. The light responded perfectly to the app on Margaret's phone, dimming and brightening at her touch. Technology, she said with mock severity, making electricians obsolete one smart bulb at a time. Not quite yet. Someone still has to install the things. We just finished our 4th session of life skills for real people that morning. The program had grown beyond anything we'd imagined. We now had a waiting list for each 6-week series, and the community center had asked us to consider expanding to weeknight classes. Margaret had also been invited to speak at 3 other towns about implementing similar programs. Charlie, she said suddenly, do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't called you that day? You mean if you'd called someone else to fix the light? Or if I'd just lived with it flickering? If I'd been too embarrassed to ask for help? I sat down beside her on the swing, something I'd done hundreds of times over the past year. Wouldn't have done that. You're not someone who accepts broken things when they can be fixed. I was accepting a lot of broken things before you came along. I was accepting loneliness, accepting that my best years were behind me, accepting that I should be grateful for scraps of attention from friends who saw me as a charity case. She leaned against my shoulder, and I breathed in the familiar scent of her shampoo. Even after all this time, the simple comfort of her presence still amazed me. You know what I realized? She continued. I spent years thinking I needed to fix myself before I could be worthy of love. I thought I had to be younger, More interesting, less set in my ways. But you didn't fall in love with some improved version of me. You fell in love with me exactly as I was 50 years old. Divorced, sometimes cranky, definitely stubborn. Don't forget brilliant, beautiful, and brave enough to ask a stranger to hold you. That too, she smiled. But the point is, I didn't need fixing. I just needed someone who could see me clearly. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Watching the neighborhood go about its evening routine, Mrs. Chen was watering her flowers across the street. The Rodriguez family was loading camping gear into their car for a weekend trip. Normal life, normal people, going about their normal, beautiful business. Margaret, I said finally, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret it?
Any?
Of it. The gossip. The fight with the HOA. People talking about us. She turned to look at me directly. Charlie, a year ago, I was sitting in this same spot, alone, watching other people live their lives while I waited for mine to start again. Tonight I'm sitting here with the man I love, planning our next class, excited about tomorrow. What exactly would I regret? The complications? The judgment? The judgment taught me who my real friends are. The complications gave us something to fight for together. She took my hand. Besides, what's the alternative? Playing it safe. Settling for loneliness because it's easier than facing criticism. Car pulled into the driveway next door, the Jeffersons, returning from their own evening out. They waved politely. Same neighbors who'd once whispered about our relationship now simply accepting us as part of the landscape. You know what I think? Margaret said. I think most people spend their whole lives waiting for permission to be happy. Permission from their families, their communities, their own fears. But happiness doesn't wait for permission. It just shows up sometimes, usually when you're not looking for it, and asks if you're brave enough to choose it. And you chose it. We chose it together. As if on cue, the porch light flickered once. Not a malfunction this time. Just Margaret testing the dimmer function on her phone. The warm glow settled over us like a blessing. I have one more question, I said. Shoot. Will you marry me? Margaret's hand stilled on her phone. The light held steady, illuminating her face as she turned to stare at me with eyes wide with surprise and something that might have been joy. Told. Charlie, ... I know we've never talked about marriage. I know. It brings up all sorts of complicated questions about the future. But I love you, Margaret Chen. I love the life we've built together, and I want to keep building it for as long as we're both here. She was quiet for so long I started to panic. Then she smiled, the same smile that had captivated me in her. Kitchen over lemon cake, the same smile that had given me courage to kiss her for the first time. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. Later, much later. As we lay in bed talking about rings and ceremonies and whether we were too old to be this ridiculously happy, Margaret reached over and turned off the bedside lamp. But the porch, lights stayed on, steady and bright, a beacon that had somehow led us both home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.